you.
Great.
And take it away, David.
Awesome. Can folks see the screen and hear me all right?
Yes.
Sweet. Well, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much, folks. And yeah, really excited to be here. Thank you, Gloria, Katie, and Amelia. Awesome presentation. And yeah, excited to follow that up. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Dave Krug, and I'm calling in from Central Yukon in the community of Mayo on the territories of the First Nation of Notchinayak-Dun. And today I'm going to be talking about some teachings and findings that emerged from my master's research, which I completed this past fall at the University of Victoria. The project I was involved in looked at how Indigenous and community-led seed supply networks in Canada are developing relational infrastructures that support meaningful socio-ecological restoration outcomes. This year's conference theme, building resilient native seed infrastructure, felt like a really natural fit for this work. So I'm excited to, be sharing this with you. But before I dive into the findings, I wanted to offer some context and clarify a few key terms I'm using in my title and that I'm going to be referencing throughout the presentation. And I'll note how I came to understand these terms and what they mean in the context of seed work and restoration that I've been involved in. And even before that, I'd also like to take a moment to position myself in this work and to emphasize that the understandings I'm sharing today reflect my own interpretations and synthesis of the teachings and knowledge that has been very generously shared with me throughout this process. I'm a queer white settler restoration practitioner. I currently live and work on the territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanish peoples in Victoria, BC. I grew up in Southern Ontario on the territories of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation and have lived, studied, and worked across so-called Canada. I began working with seeds and practicing restoration up here in the Yukon, one of Canada's northern territories, alongside my project partners at Yukon Seed and Restoration. Yukon Seed is a majority First Nation-owned native seed and restoration organization established to support and build capacity for community-led seed-based restoration in the territory. And it was here during my time building relationships with the people and the seeds of the Yukon that the project I'll be talking about today began to take shape. So to start off, I'd like to explain my use of the term socio-ecological restoration. So meeting 21st century restoration needs requires approaches that address not only ecological health and integrity, but the well-being of social ecological systems. Social ecological systems, as understood through social ecological systems theory, are webs of interconnected and adaptive biophysical and sociocultural elements that interact through dynamic relationships across space and time. And inherent within these are relationships. And within those relationships are a multiplicity of relational values that enrich the connections between people, non-human beings, and place. And so given this context, I've come to understand and make use of this term, socio-ecological restoration, to describe the numerous dynamic restorative processes that support the reestablishment and well-being of the relationships between people, non-human beings, and place. And these processes are carried out through practices that are both socially and ecologically grounded in place and time. Thank you to Dr. Kimmerer this morning for really priming this, but this framing very much aligns with numerous other related approaches and conceptualizations such as eco or biocultural restoration, which emphasize the renewal of place-based, culturally grounded responsibilities, practices, and relationships. And these are approaches that are made possible and meaningful when guided by Indigenous leadership and place-based value systems. So next, I'd like to offer a brief explanation on how and why I'm using this term relational infrastructure and how it fits within a framework of broader seed supply infrastructures and systems. As I'm sure most of you know, with growing demand for restoration comes a growing need for native seeds. Again, this conference theme this year is about building the infrastructures needed to support robust seed supply and meet this growing demand. But what exactly are we talking about when we say seed supply infrastructure? So in my experience, seed infrastructure is often framed as being physical or technical, things like land, equipment, space, storage, tools, technologies. And within these contexts, infrastructure is built, it's maintained and invested in for its importance to produce and supply seeds. However, regardless of the types or developmental status of these infrastructures, they are ultimately useless, or at least far less useful, without the people, organizations, and knowledge holders working to operationalize seed supply processes. This is why restoration seed supply systems are so important. Restoration seed supply systems are complex social networks comprised of numerous actors working across spatial and temporal scales to actualize seed supply. Given their social nature, these networks rely on the strength of the relationships between the actors to function, relationships that enable things like collaboration, trust, and shared purpose, while also allowing for the recognition and existence of a diversity of relational values. So just as restoration, when framed as a socio-ecological process, is relational, so too are the systems that support it. So what allows these networks to function as relational systems? Well, relational infrastructure. So drawing on a definition from the social scholar Sam Rye, I've come to understand relational infrastructure as the social connections, interactions, and collective intelligence that allow groups to work together effectively, pool resources, and amplify their impacts. Relational infrastructure can exist in many forms and it serves many purposes, but it does not exist without being built and maintained, either intentionally or not. Given these understandings, I became curious about relational infrastructure in the context of socio-ecological restoration and seed supply, and particularly how it's being developed within restoration systems in Canada and the role of Indigenous leadership in these processes. There's some really powerful case studies that have highlighted these processes and impacts already, and I think we just heard one before. Indigenous and community leadership in seed supply networks can be found globally, demonstrating how local actions and community autonomy support native seed supply while also contributing to broader socio-ecological restoration outcomes and support for Indigenous sovereignty. There are numerous Indigenous organizations working towards the development of similar networks here in Canada, including the Yukon. However, these networks and the work they do remains critically under-recognized. So my thesis research emerged as a way to explore and highlight some of this work to better understand how Indigenous and community-led seed supply organizations and networks are building this important relational infrastructure, and how this relational work supports not only seed supply, but a multitude of important socio-ecological restoration outcomes. And to do this, along with my project partner, we designed a research program that had me speaking directly with native seed and restoration practitioners, working with Indigenous and community-led organizations in Northern and Western Canada to address two research questions. The first being, how do local contexts, conditions, and values shape Indigenous and community-led restoration seed supply network development in Canada? And how do these networks influence socio-ecological restoration processes and outcomes? And so we ended up speaking with 10 participants through 7 interviews representing 6 of these organizations in Western and Northern Canada, 2 from the Yukon and 4 from British Columbia. Interview participants were asked about their successes and challenges, local context around seed market development, and the nature of the relationships they hold with their local communities and regional networks, and approaches to an understanding of seed value. And so based on a thematic synthesis of this information shared with us, we came to an understanding that these organizations serve as more than just alternatives to conventional restoration seed suppliers. They are integral components of a complex network of individuals and groups interconnected through various relationships that collectively support and facilitate socio-ecological restoration. And they do this by facilitating several enabling functions, including local capacity building, knowledge sharing, ongoing community engagement, and engagement with Indigenous governance structures. They also directly support seed supply through the initiation of local seed initiatives and the development of the needed physical and organizational infrastructure that operationalize seed supply. These organizations, networks, and the functions they support foster meaningful socio-ecological restoration outcomes that promote things like self-governance and autonomy, enhance community well-being, and increase local capacity for land stewardship. Beyond these structural and process-derived elements, numerous important teachings and understandings emerged through the conversations I had. And I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of these as heard through the participants' voices that spoke them. I think these insights offer some of the best context for the importance and impact of this work. So the first teaching will come as no surprise, and it's that restoration is a relational practice. As this participant says, No one person can do all of this on their own. I don't believe in self-sufficiency. That's not a thing. That's a very colonial concept. We're supposed to be community sufficient. The next important teaching I bring forward is the recognition of alternative restoration outcomes, which is something I've touched on but comes through so strongly in this participant's words. The overlap between land healing and self-healing really offers a place to combat some of that challenging stuff in yourself. I think that's also what makes it unique. By essence, it's about reconnection. Seed work is being demonstrated here to offer this amazing opportunity for reconnection and healing that greatly benefits the people involved, their communities, and the places they value. Which segues well into this final teaching I'd like to share, which is that seeds hold many different values, and we can understand their value in many different ways. As this participant says, I don't think the value is just in seeds. I think it's the value of connection and community engagement and bringing people together to collect seeds. I think this is very important. What I hope this communicates is that seeds hold a great deal of intrinsic value. Through the interviews and readings that informed this research, I heard people speak about the associated values of seeds in many different contexts: economic, ecological, social, and cultural. In this way, seeds function not only as an essential material input for restoration, but also as a relational anchor within restoration and seed networks, bringing people together through the shared work of collecting, processing, sharing, and caring for seeds. Because of this, I would argue that seeds themselves can be understood as a form of relational infrastructure, embodying and carrying a diversity of relational values that connect people to the land and to one another. So in my thesis, I explore this a little bit more through a conceptual model of something I'm calling pluralistic value recognition, asking what might be possible if we more fully acknowledge and account for the multiplicity of values that seeds represent. So imagine a world where the price of seeds reflected the full scope of what seeds mean in the context of restoration and social ecological systems. The benefits they bring, the relationships they sustain, and the critical infrastructure they represent. Alongside technical and economic assessments of seed value, relational, cultural, and community-based values would also be recognized and incorporated. This kind of approach would also help guide the development of policies, programs, and funding mechanisms that more meaningfully support restoration systems that are attentive to the value pluralism embedded within them. However, recognizing the values of seeds is not just a conceptual shift. It requires leadership and action that is grounded in these values. This is where Indigenous leadership becomes essential. Indigenous leadership, rooted in culturally diverse, place-based systems of value, stewardship, and relationships, is essential not only for achieving long-term, meaningful, and relevant socio-ecological restoration outcomes, but for ensuring that restoration networks are also guided and governed by these values. In this way, Indigenous leadership is not only simply participation within existing structures, but the ability to autonomously shape the priorities, practices, and processes that guide restoration and the functioning of its supply networks. This is exemplified by the work of Indigenous and community-led seed supply networks in Canada and globally. It's my hope that this work helps demonstrate the importance of Indigenous and community-led seed supply networks in developing the critical relational, physical, and seed infrastructures needed to realize meaningful socio-ecological restoration. These networks foster the stewardship of seeds and support the long-term well-being of ecosystems, people, and communities. They offer not only practical pathways for restoration, but also hope for more just, connected, and resilient futures rooted in place, relationships, and Indigenous leadership. And with that, I would like to say thank you. Excited to be here and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, David. Doesn't look like there are questions in the Q&A at this moment. We can keep an eye on it. There are some incredible resources being shared in the chat as well from the last talk. And just thank you so much for the incredible work you all are doing. A comment, nice work, David. And we can take a moment to see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we can take a moment to, let's see. I'm curious to know, here's a question or a comment. I'm curious to know what the red fruits were in his photo from Russ. Oh, David, are you still there?
I just muted myself. Red fruits. Let me see if I can find the photo and figure out what we're maybe at the very beginning. In this slide, maybe. Yeah, there's some low bush cranberry, um, rosehip, and that's dwarf dogwood, Cornus canadensis.
Wonderful, thank you. And we do have a few moments for questions that just popped up in the Q&A. Have you encountered any cultural uses for seeds? Like here, many seeds are used for LEIS, lace, in Hawaii.
Yeah, very cool. Not sort of specifically in that context, like using them in sort of cultural items, but more so just as a way of building relationship with the land. And I sort of didn't include this in the presentation, but I drew on some work from folks talking about seed sovereignty in the context of agriculture, but understanding how seeds are sort of this like really important historical and cultural element that helps people build relationships with the land, and that's sort of being the primary use of them, and for food and so many other things too, like the plants themselves that are alive inside those seeds. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. David, from your work, how do you see native seed producers and local Indigenous communities working together to increase the supply of seed in Canada?
Yeah, again, I think I would maybe echo something that Robin said this morning, just about partnership building. I think, there are so many opportunities to build partnerships between native seed producers, indigenous communities, and, also indigenous communities that are native seed producers themselves. They're always looking for resources, and they're learning a lot of this as well, sort of on the go. And so building those partnerships to share resources and share knowledge and just become a community too, I think is really critical.
Yeah, thank you for that. Another question is dwarf dogwood edible?
No, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but I was shared with me that dwarf dogwood is also referred to as itchy bumberry. So I guess in that context it is edible, but I think it's advisable not to eat it. It's got like little hairs on the seeds, so yeah, not a fun time.
Does not sound pleasant.
No, no.
Thank you so much, David. Looks like there aren't any more questions, and I will remind folks to put questions in the Q&A in the Zoom. But thank you so much. It was great
Awesome. Thank
talking
you,
to you.
everybody.
And next, we are happy to have Maya Kahn-Abrams from the Oregon State University. They will be presenting on the CTUIR First Food Seed Banking Program, developing a rapid assessment protocol for a bioregional seed banking effort. Maya, you can begin to share your screen and unmute and take it away when you're ready.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hello, my name is Maya Kahn-Abrams, and I'm going to talk today about the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and my work through Oregon State University with starting a seed banking program with CTUIR. So, let's see. Okay, and so I'm Maya Kahn-Abrams. I am the First Foods, or I was the First Foods program botanist at the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center. And I worked there with my supervisor, Brian Endres, who is really one of the kind of spearheaders of this program in collaboration with CTUIR. And so we have worked primarily with Cheryl Shippentauer, who is a CTUIR ecologist. And then last year, CTUIR hired their own first foods botanist, that's Rosa Aurelianus. And then we work closely with Gail Redberg, who runs the CTUIR Native Plant Nursery. And then this project has been in collaboration with the Forest Service, principally Susan Thies, who is the South Zone botanist out of Heppner. And before I start the presentation, I just want to say that I am not a CTUIR Enrolled Tribal member. The information that I'll be sharing about first foods is what has been shared with me by CTUIR, and I am not representing obviously any of my own personal information. I'm just passing along what has been shared with me to provide context for this seed banking program. So the Confederated Tribes of the Indian Reservation is a confederation of 3 tribes that were put onto a reservation together via the Treaty of 1855. When the United States government moved into Oregon and Washington and started rounding up tribes and establishing treaties with them to allow for colonization of the West. So this map, this largest polygon, shows what CTUIR considers their ancestral territory. So you can see it's pretty large. It goes from California down into California and up into Canada. And in the Treaty of 1855, there were basically 2 major things that happened. The first being that these 3 tribes were put onto a reservation. That's the smallest polygon. So 6.4 million acres of land was ceded into a 172,000 acre reservation, which is now half owned by non-native peoples. And then one of the really important things, though, with this treaty is that the CTUIR retained rights, fishing, hunting, and gathering rights for roots and berries, and that is this this polygon here. And so that is really what this is going to be focused on, is this polygon of the ceded rights, or the ceded lands that CTUIR has treaty rights to. So this is the reservation polygon, and this is Union, Oregon, where the Eastern Agricultural Research Center is located. So the Eastern Agricultural Research Center was founded in 1901 as part of the 1887 Hatch Act that created federal funding for agricultural research stations throughout the United States. Its historical function has been primarily to support cattle ranching, but we are currently trying to develop programming with CTUIR in order to extend the idea of who does the station serve and how are we defining agriculture. And so we have worked to help facilitate relationships between CTUIR and state and federal partners in order for CTUIR to be able to access their full treaty lands and be able to use them for first foods. So first foods are central to CTUIR's culture and cultural expression. First foods have sustained tribal peoples since time immemorial, and these ongoing relationships with the different species that underpin their food system and the work required in order to manage landscapes for those foods is really central and kind of the bedrock of CTUI culture. First foods serve as a fundamental role in both health, well-being, and cultural identity, with really important religious events, including the Celery Feast, Salmon Feast, Root Feast, and Huckleberry Feasts that really celebrate these different foods throughout the year. Oh, and one thing I want to say is that these slides that I'm presenting on these first foods, I did not make these slides. These slides can be, they were created largely by Eric Quimpetz and another person who I will talk about later. And I have put links to these in this presentation, but also I have put links to this in, I don't know, there was like a thing that I could put article posts on WOVA. I have no idea what that looks like for you guys because I can't see what it looks like for you, but I have those links so that you guys can look at those resources more if you want to. Okay, so, sorry, I'm not really sure what you can see on my screen. Anyway, so this is the First Foods Feast, which happens every year. And so I just wanted to give you a context for where the plants that we're going to be focusing are in this menagerie of first foods. This is an image of the First Foods Feast happening I'm not going to explain the first food feast. You can learn more about that, but I just wanted to highlight the importance that these food species have in CTUIR culture. They're also really integral to important ceremonies for children. So there's the first salmon and first kill ceremony for salmon and elk, and then there's also digging and picking ceremonies for children, and this is all like really important into their initiation into the tribe. And historically, a lot of land management has focused mostly on salmon and elk management, and so there was kind of like a need within the tribe. People were saying like, this is great that we're talking about men's foods, but what about women's foods? What about roots and berries? We really need to pay more attention to them and conserve them and work for their conservation. So CTUIR has a really amazing Department of Natural Resources, and they basically have been developing conservation management practices focused on first food. So this started with the 2008 River Vision, which was basically identifying how to conserve riparian zones for salmon habitat. And then later in 2019, they created a First Foods Upland Vision, which is really focused on what we're focused on, which is roots and berries and how to conserve rangeland upland ecosystems for those species. So we have really been focused on these kinds of objectives of the Upland Vision, which is first food planting and survival and abundance. And then, like I said, Winnex Red Elk and then Cheryl Shippentower have more, these are both YouTube videos you can watch on climate and women's foods and first foods in general. But that's kind of the context for this work. So in this First Foods Upland Vision, which Brian of OSU was part of writing, basically from this document stemmed this First Foods long-term monitoring project, which is basically establishing First Foods long-term monitoring plots that get monitored every 3 to 5 years across the ceded territories. These are just the monitoring plots that we looked at in 2025. So really trying to get long-term monitoring data on first food abundance in order to get a better understanding of what's happening with these species and how abundant and available they are and how they're being impacted by climate change. And so from that, we started a seed banking program. So the first food species, we kind of separated them into priority 1 and priority 2 species based on cultural significance and the desire or need for, and also rarity and just the desire and need for seed bank of those seeds. And I'm not going to go through all the species by name, but most of these species are either geophytes like camas and bitterroot. There's tons of lomatian species that are considered celeries, Paraduridia, which is known as yampa or suic, and that's like a pretty big staple food. And then lots of berries, ribes species, obviously huckleberry, and then like serviceberry chokecherry. And so I wanted to show you this because for all of you who have not been out to Eastern Oregon and the Blue Mountains, there's a really amazing kind of like, how do I say this? Like intelligence behind this food system in the way that this landscape is distributed. So you have these upland, dry upland shrub steppe ecosystems that are often on the same hillside as these lowland, wetland, riparian wet meadow ecosystems with dry or moist conifer forest in between. And so you have this huge range of different species that are kind of associated with these different habitats occurring in this like very heterogeneous patchwork spatial situation across the landscape. And so it allows for this like very diverse food system where you can actually access a lot of these species really like close together in terms of distance, despite the fact that they're from very like distinct ecosystems. And so basically one of the things, so I guess the first question is, where do we collect seeds from? So we have kind of like built around this long-term monitoring structure in order to like structure seed collecting. So we have a long-term monitoring point. And so these are actually 2 different sites. And so the long-term monitoring plots are these little blue points. And then from these long-term monitoring plots, we then map the first food species in these areas. And so these are different species. The different colors and shapes are different species of first foods that we then map in order to know where they are. And then the black is actually the seed collection. So then we go back through and we collect seed. And so actually the collections are kind of paired to this monitoring information that we have. And then we also collect soil and voucher specimens along with the seed collection and the phenology information that I'm about to get into to try to create this like multi-layered data around these first food sites. And a lot of these places we've targeted are important gathering sites or places that could potentially be gathering sites. And then the other place that we target for seed collecting is roadside populations. So these are populations that are not accessible or appropriate for gathering in an attempt to kind of reclaim these population genetics and reintroduce them back into wild populations, and also get these genetics accessible to the tribe and to gatherers, and also allow them to be used in restoration efforts. So to get these genetics back into the like genetic population that is being used by the tribe. And so we have a lot of plants, we have a lot of different areas to collect from, and these plants have a lot of differences in terms of their physical structure, where they grow, what their seeds look like. So part of the challenge of this was trying to create some type of rapid assessment, which would allow us to collect information on the plant's phenology, and also so when they're flowering, when they're going to seed, how abundant they are, the health of the population, and then how high quality is the seed, but in a way that allows us to quickly assess this and can be used across a wide variety of plants, because we have plants, we're looking at plants from like tiny forbs to full-on trees. And so we have a qualitative assessment aspect of this, and then we also developed a quantitative assessment aspect in order to do this. And so I just wanted to highlight that we have these kinds of three classes. I separated these into three classes. So we have small forbs, medium to large forbs, and then medium to large shrubs. And we want to be able to look at these plants on a population level. So assessing what is the health of the population, how healthy and what's going on with the individuals in terms of seed production, and then actually individually assessing seed quantity and quality. At these across a range of multiple scales. And the challenge here was, how do I create a flexible data collection that would allow me to look at all of these plants across these multiple scales. So this is a plot setup design that I actually took from the South Carolina Biological Survey, and it's a nested plot design, which basically allows you to be at larger scales for larger plants and smaller scales for the smallest plants. So for large trees and shrubs, choke cherries, which are full-on trees, we have these two different plot designs that can go, this is a 20 by 80 meter plot, and this is a 20 by 20 meter plot. And then we have this nested information. So population information is collected on a larger scale, and then we have fruit and seed collection information being collected on a smaller scale, so which it allows us to assess larger amounts of the population without having to count hundreds of plants, and assess hundreds of plants. So I know I don't have very much time. But I also wanted to just show you this. So what is the goal of this? The goal of this is to have a better understanding of the phenology and population health of these species on a bioregional scale. So this white line is the ceded treaty territories that we're working with, and as you can see, it spans two states and a lot of different ecosystems. And so the goal here is to be able to start collecting data from a lot of these different areas in order to compare when plants are flowering, when plants are going to seed, how healthy are the plants declining, and then how healthy is the seed, how abundant is the seed. And so this is just the Campos collections from 2025, but you can see that the goal is to really hit a lot of different areas across this seeded territory. And then even in collection areas that are close together, you can see that there's a lot of different topography happening here. And so by collecting data across these populations and across these topographic variations, we can also start to see how is elevation and topography starting to affect these populations even within a geographically close area. And then I don't know, I guess I should probably open it up to questions, but another huge part of what we do is obviously seed cleaning for seed banking. So we have to deal with a lot of wet seed because we have a lot of berries, and that can be a very long and time intensive process. And I did have these videos to just show you some of the ways that we process these seeds. These are, I think those are choke cherry seeds, and this is maybe camas seed, but I'm not gonna get into that right now. And then dry seed, a lot of dry seed cleaning. And then where does the seed go? So we have this long-term banking program where we are just storing seeds for the future, but then also some of these seeds do go out into native plant materials development for restoration. And then we also have seed research that we are doing in collaboration with CTUIR to start answering some of the hard-hitting questions about how these seeds work and what happens to them under cultivation. So that's it. I guess I will open it up for questions
Maya,
now.
thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible amount of work and important work. Thank you. We have a question from Mimi. Hi, such a cool presentation. Could you talk about tribal members' input on the design of models you are using throughout these monitoring trials and the seed bank priorities / community access?
Yeah, so everything we do is in direct consultation with Cheryl and CTUIR DNR. So the first food monitoring is being developed in collaboration with CTUIR and OSU. So we we meet with Cheryl and CTUIR, we decide where we want to establish plots. The work itself is done in collaboration. Like we had a field crew last year, but also like Cheryl and Rosa, and they hire seasonal technicians. They all come out to do all the work that we do at CTR. This is only one of 3 projects that we are working on with them. And then, yeah, everything we do is in direct consultation with them. We're just honestly providing more of the capacity to implement the work, but everything we do is directed by CTUIR. We don't make up any goals. We don't make up the species list, was determined by them. Everything we do is basically they say what we want to do and then we help make it happen.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that answer. We have a couple more minutes for questions. Krista asks, how long do you ferment berries?
That's a great question. That's a loaded question. So the longer, the better in terms of getting the skins off, but then there's obviously rot and fungi. So last year, it depended more on when we could get to the berries. When we would harvest the berries, I immediately put them into water, and some of them actually sat in water for 2 months, 3 months while we finished the field season. And they got there was a layer of fungi over the top, but then we just scooped that off and we were able to process them and they were fine. Part of what I wanted to do next in this position was start germination testing different seed lots in order to see if that impacts viability. But in terms of just surface characteristics, I would do it at least a week, but basically after that, the longer you do it, the easier it is to get the seed out.
Okay, thank you so much for that. One more question in the chat. For native species collected for seed that are within edible fruits, prunus, for example, I am wondering if you are salvaging the edible portion of the fruit while saving the seed for propagation. I've done this with myself for Amoêdo fruits, saving the seed while eating the fruit pulp.
Yeah, so not currently. It's definitely something I obviously have thought about since we're collecting plants that are for food and then disposing of the part that's edible for the seed part. So this is definitely something I've thought about before. I think one of the biggest issues is just the fermenting process kind of makes the food part not really edible anymore, but it does save on time in terms of getting the seeds out. So there's a trade-off there, but berry, one thing I learned last year is just these berry plants are incredibly abundant, and so we did actually end up giving one of our technicians, Tiana, was an enrolled tribal member, and so we would send her home with choke cherries and different stuff because we just I was okay, we could really have too much to be able to process seed or we just don't need all this seed. So yeah, so trying to figure out what to do with the edible parts is part of the kind of evolving process here.
Thank you so much for that answer. All right, and thank you for that presentation. So we have our next presenter, Semirian Campos Amoêdo from Ação, Ecológica, Guaporé, Ecoporé, and they will be presenting on seed networks as a strategy for climate justice and socioeconomic inclusion. Take it away, Semirian.
Thank you. Hello, good morning. My name is Semirian. I'm Brazilian. I apologize for not be fluent in your language. I am a biologist with a PhD in botany, and I am analyst in the NGO Ecoporé, which operates the Brazilian Amazon, focus on the conservation and restoration ecosystems. Today I will talk about how city network can act as a strategy for climate justice and socioeconomic inclusion, especially in the Amazon. This presentation brings insights from our experience working with restoration initiatives and the Amazonian Bioeconomy Seeds Network, que é Receba. The main idea I would like to share is simple. Restoration ecosystem is not just an ecology test. It is also social and political process. Next, please. Next, okay. The global climate crisis does not affect everyone in the same way. Their impact and the responsibility are profoundly unequal, shaped by historical, economic, and political factors. Indigenous peoples, quilombolas, communities, riverside population, and family farms are among the groups most exposed to climate risk. However, paradoxically, they are also among the most prepared to respond because their livelihoods are closely linked to ecosystems in the long-term environmental management. It is where that concept of climate justice becomes central. It reminds us that climate change is not just an environmental issue, but also as a matter of equality and rights. Next, please. In the Amazon plays a crucial role in regulation the global climate. It stores vast amounts of carbon and is home to one of the greatest biodiversity on Earth. However, the continuous deforestation drives by logging, mining, and agricultural expansion that not only local ecosystem but also the stability of the plant's climate system. Protect the Amazon, therefore, is not a regional issue in the global priority. The next, please. In this context, seed network emerge as practical and transformative solution. They are collaborative systems that organize the collection process and commercialization of native seeds. But its importance goes far beyond supply restoration projects. Seed networks create local economic opportunity, strengthen territorial governance, and value traditional ecological knowledge. In other words, they show that restoration ecosystems also means restoration social relations and strengthening community autonomy. Next, please. An emblematic example is the Amazonian Bioeconomy Seed Network, Receba, created in 2021 by Ecoporé, The network started by building a database of native seed and organizing community seed collection. In these early years, it acquired about 20 tons of seeds from more than 80 collectors. In 2024, Receiver had extended to around 400 collectors, with approximately 70% being women and young people. This strong participation highlights how seed network also promotes gender equity and intergenerational renewal in forest management. Next, please. The impacts of Receba is both ecological and socioeconomic. The network sold 45 tons of seed natural from 124 species, support restoration projects in different territories at the Amazonian, different territories. In the same time, these activities generation around 1.5 million reais in direct income from families in the communities. We are able to pay for these seeds from donation and fund from national and international sources. This demonstration, the restoration can can promote biodiversity recovery and strengthening local economy. Next, please. This experience is particularly relevant considering Brazil's concomitant and restoration to 12 million hectares by 2030. Next, please. In conclusion, climate justice can be achieved with local leadership. Seed networks show that it is possible to combine ecological restoration with income generation, cultural diversity, and territorial empowerment. In this QR code, you can see a beautiful video about this work. Restoring forests, therefore, is not just about planting trees. It's involved recognizing rights, valuing knowledge, and rebuilding fair relationship with nature. Next, please. Here are my contacts in the network of my institution, and feel free to get to know us, and thank you very much.
Semirian, that was incredible. Everyone is so inspired by the work that you're doing. Lots of thank yous in the comments. Incredible work. We don't have a question at the moment, but your work is definitely well loved. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the next presenter will be Cindy Nguyen, and she was from Ecostudies Institute. She will be presenting on using outreach and networking opportunities to build a multi-faced and geographical diverse native seed coalition. Cindy, you are all set to present.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here for this talk. I'm Cindy Nguyen, and I work for the Ecostudies Institute. We're a nonprofit based out of Olympia, Washington. And I am the coordinator for the Washington Native Seed Coalition. And I wanted to have a chat with you today about how we were able to build a really diverse coalition membership that has a really broad reach across our state. Next, please. So the Washington Native Seed Coalition is a collection of native seed producers, land managers, and restorationists from across the state. With funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and coordination through the Ecostudies Institute, we've brought together a really diverse group of people under a shared vision and mission. Our right seeds in the right place at the right time for Washington, and our mission of strengthening communication and collaboration to get those seeds across Washington. We currently have over 100 active members, and over 240 people are receiving our quarterly newsletters. Our members represent federal, state, and county agencies, nonprofits, conservation districts, tribal interests, universities, seed collectors, and seed producers, both large and small. So in this presentation, we'll talk about how we were able to bring them all together using direct interviews, online surveys, and outreach, and taking advantage of existing collaborations and work groups in order to continue to increase engagement and membership. Next, please. So where do you start with this? How did we start? The work really starts with talking with as many people as possible and finding out what the needs are in your state and what kind of collaboration you need in order to address those needs. So here in Washington, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had done a lot of outreach and interviews as part of building their partnerships in the Columbia River Plateau. Using funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law, they brought together public, private, and nonprofit sectors to increase the native plant materials available for fire recovery in the sagebrush steppe. They also learned from those interviews that there was a strong need and desire for greater statewide coordination. So when I was brought in as coordinator for what would grow into the Washington Native Seed Coalition, I started with those previous interviews and an additional list of about 50 other contacts who they thought I should reach out to. And if you've ever done outreach of this sort, it's safe to assume that any requests you send out for interviews, you're only going to get a fraction of those people responding to you and agreeing to have a chat. So I really wanted to focus on growing my list of contacts in order to increase my odds. One of the easiest and most successful ways to get more names on my list was at the end of every interview asking, who else should I talk to? Who are you working with on these projects? Could you make an introduction for me? No one in these areas works in a bubble. So it's really important to find out who they're buying their seeds from, who are they asking for help and advice. And it's really helpful if you have a name to drop in your outreach. So saying like, hey, Chris at the BLM gave me your email address. That really, really helps increase the number of people who respond to your outreach. I also wanted to make sure that my list of contacts had a really good representation from across the state. I wanted a diversity of agencies and tribes and nonprofits. I needed to fill the gaps in my list, and when you can't get an introduction, the internet is your friend. You can find a lot of online directories. There's directories for conservation districts, nonprofits, and land trusts working in different regions across the state. There are a lot of tribal user groups. I used a lot of information from the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission to find contacts for tribal folks who would be interested in speaking about native seed. The NRCS has a published directory of people to reach out to. And when the Forest Service still had their online directory, I cold emailed just about every botanist in the state of Washington. I sent out over 80 emails and requests for interviews, and I managed to interview about 30 people. Next, please. So I will say our initial outreach really paid off. And by August of 2024, when we held our statewide virtual meeting to officially kick off work on a Washington native seed strategy, we were able to have a really good response to that. We sent out a save the date email, and with that email, we had attached a survey. It asked some of the same questions that we had in our interview, assessing where people's greatest issues with native seed were, and what kind of coordination and support they would want from some kind of collective. We asked those 80 people we would initially had sent out requests for interviews to pass on that survey to people that they worked with, people that they thought might be interested. And we ended up receiving back about 130 responses. And anyone who has tried to do some kind of mass survey, that's a really great level of response to have coming from those initial 80 emails that we sent out. The responses from those people are represented by these purple points on the maps, but of course the regions that they work in are much larger. Next, please. We also took advantage of the connections and networks that already existed between organizations and continue to grow our coalition with them. So this bubble map shows some of the connections between agencies and organizations that we are able to leverage. We took advantage of outreach opportunities at working group meetings, such as their Lands Conference, and we make connections in regions that are less represented. We also leverage conferences like the National Native Seed Conference and take advantage of forums to reach a wider audience. When we held our first official Washington Native Seed Coalition in February of 2025, we had 92 people show up either in person or online. That was a really, really great showing. Next, please. So drawing from that diverse membership, we've been able to put together really diverse working groups that address some key parts of our strategy. We have an advisory board that represents both different areas of the state along with different types of seed users and producers. Next. And to keep up that level of engagement, we continue to publish our quarterly newsletter that has information about our quarterly meetings and our agendas. We really wanted to make this group really easy to access, so people don't need to be able to come to meetings to see what's happening, and they have access to meeting notes through the newsletter. We're also launching our website later this spring to continue to share information about upcoming meetings, and we continue to do outreach through conferences and other work groups such as this one. This year, we'll be focusing a lot on building our relationships with more Washington tribal communities. We know there's a lot of demand for their time, and we want to make sure that we are building relationships. And so our first step is to reach out, engage them, and let them know what we're about and what we're doing, and to show respect for their time. We're also offering honorariums if they'd like to be involved, and so it doesn't become a burden on their time. Next, please. So in conclusion, just be bold, like reach out to people, cold email, make phone calls, take advantage of the connections that already exist. And if you can, make it someone's job. It's a lot of work, and if it's actually part of their job description, that helps go a long way to getting a lot of this outreach done. And that's it from me.
Thank you so much. There is so much interest in seeing the survey as well in the chat. And you're right, be bold is an incredible goal to have. So thank you, Cindy. We don't have time for questions, but wonderful work. And next we have Stephanie Frischie from International Network of Seed-Based Restoration, INSR, and she will be presenting on learning from each other, the International Network for Seed-Based Restoration. And looks like you're on. Take it away, Stephanie.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. Hello, hello. My name is Stephanie Frischie, and I'm really grateful to be here with you all in day 2 and in this session of the National Native Seed Conference. It's so energizing to hear the speakers' questions and be part of the community here. I'm the chair-elect of the board for INSR, the International Network for Seed-Based Restoration. And in this lightning talk, I will share what our network is, who our network is as a hub of human expertise and technical resources, and how we serve our members and learn from each other for improved outcomes in seed-based restoration. Next, please. The International Network for Seed-Based Restoration, or INSR, was formed at the 2015 National Native Seed Conference with a goal to serve and connect those working with native seeds around the world. The Society for Ecological Restoration, or SER, is a professional organization for those working in ecological restoration, and INSR is a thematic section within SER, specifically for those working in seed-based restoration. INSR has roughly 600 members from over 60 countries, and we're organized around the mission to foster understanding and advancement of seed ecology, conservation, and seed-based restoration of degraded systems. Next. Just a quick outline here. First, I'm going to talk about how INSR communicates with and connects our members. Then I'll cover the primary technical information resources that INSR develops and shares. And finally, I'll talk about ways you can become more involved with INSR. Next. All right. Good anticipation there. In contrast to most of the networks and initiatives in this session, INSR is a global network of restoration and native seed people. A downside of this is that we aren't regionally or locally place-based, but an upside of it is that we get to meet and interact with limitless people and the places they are connected to and learn from each other. The hub of how we connect and communicate and provide value to our members is the INSR website. The URL is here, ser-info.org. And all of the items I'm going to talk about in the next slides can be found on our website. Next, please. So continuing with this theme of how we communicate and connect are our e-newsletter and social media. One benefit for INSR members is a quarterly e-newsletter, and each issue includes sections on news. These are our news items are profiles of projects, tools, and techniques, and they are submitted by members. It's a chance for you to let your work shine. The events section highlights upcoming webinars and conferences and other gatherings, and the publications section is a timely digest of reports, white papers, and peer-reviewed articles. And then social media, the primary platforms we use are Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter or X, where we are at seed, the number 4, restoration. And on YouTube, we are INSR. And additionally, under the theme of communicate and connect, is that at conferences, we host informal meetups among members for networking purposes and some great FaceTime and socialization, as well as formally organizing symposia and trainings, such as seed mix design. There are several webinars, such as Indigenous Native Seed Networks in Brazil, seed technology. All those webinars are also available on our YouTube channel. And then we also hold an annual members meeting, and this tends to be hybrid. It's in person at a large conference with a virtual option for folks to join from anywhere. Next, please. This is our exciting new announcement here. We will soon be releasing a new INSR podcast, Native Seed Stories. The goal of Native Seed Stories is to share experiences, knowledge, and lessons learned from around the world to improve the supply and use of native seeds for ecological restoration. And we'll be starting with 8 initial episodes where we'll talk with experts, including seed collectors and seed-based restoration practitioners from the outback of Australia to the prairies of the United States and many other places on our planet Earth. Next. Then I'm moving on here to the theme of technical information resources. So we have organized and hosted several webinars and online trainings. As I mentioned, these are archived and available on the INSR YouTube channel. And then in the next slides, I'll talk about the native seed standards articles and their translations, a documentary film called Native Seeds, Supplying Restoration, and the Seed Information Database. Next. Start with the Seed Information Database, or SID. It's a repository of seed traits. It was originally developed and hosted by Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and then a few years ago it was transferred to SER and INSR, and it now lives at this URL here, ser-sid.org. Currently, the database hosts over 197,000 records from more than 55,000 taxa. These include oil content, dispersal syndrome, protein content, seed weight, morphology, storage behavior, and germination proportions under specific conditions or treatments. Next slide, please. In 2020, INSR established the first comprehensive standards for seed-based restoration. These are published in an open access special issue of Restoration Ecology, pictured here, and the articles cover roughly the chronological steps or cyclical processes involved in seed-based restoration, from seed needs planning to collection, production, and procurement, seed testing, storage, seed dormancy, and then finally using seeds in restoration. And I'm excited too that these standards are now translated into 7 languages beyond English. And those translations were done by and for INSR members. To bring these standards and the articles to life, in 2023, we produced a 9-part documentary series called Native Seeds, Supplying Restoration. And this film explores the native seed supply chain in the Western United States as the example case study. It's filmed over 4 seasons and weaves together footage of seed collectors, farmers, researchers, and land managers working to scale up the supply of native seeds to meet growing restoration demand. This too is available on the INSR YouTube channel. Additionally, if you want to host a special in-person screening, you can get in touch with us about how to do that. And next slide, please. So yeah, this has been a very quick overview of INSR and our resources and initiatives. I hope you're interested to learn more or become involved yourself. And some ways to do that are to join SER and add INSR to your membership. If you have a particular project, research, or restoration or native seed technique to share, consider contributing a news item for the e-newsletter and the website. And we also have opportunities to serve as an ambassador representing INSR regionally at events. You can see the ambassador page on the website for more information. And the INSR, stay there please. The INSR board rotates members annually, and each year in September or October, we have a call for nominations and then elections to select new board members. So to learn more or otherwise be in touch, please email info@ser-insr.org, and I hope to hear from you soon. So thank you so much for your interest and love for native seeds and ecological restoration.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. There's lots of interest, and thank you for being such a great resource. And next, our presenters will be Catherine Prive and Tula Raban from the Understory Initiative. They will be presenting from chaos to capacity, building on an open source native seedlot tracking database. Take it away, Understory Initiative.
Hey, I hope everyone can see the slides. My name is Catherine Prive, Executive Director of the Understory Initiative. I'm here with Tula, and we are going to talk about our seed database that we built ourselves out of necessity. Tula was one of the people who helped me develop it, and so we're going to talk about why we got to where we have become. So why a database? In our experience, spreadsheets can be relatively sucky when you're trying to maintain a lot of information that spans multiple years and various types of information. And we had a situation where one of the people working on the database did a sort and some connections were lost. I'm sorry, with the spreadsheets. And so databases allow you to scale and increase your complexity without making it harder to navigate. We also have ways of tracking information about our growers, our collection sites, and species info. It's a lot easier to run reports. And then there's a more user-friendly form-based data entry system that you can actually utilize with volunteers. Specifically, the platform we chose is called Baserow. By no means is this a paid promotion or anything. It just happened to be the software that worked the best. We like it because it's a no code. We are not coders. We are ecologists. It was less expensive than some of the other like Airtable options. It's open source, so you could theoretically have your own database, your own sort of data center and self-host your data, as opposed to having it in the cloud. And it's very customizable and also cloud-based. And the reason we didn't go with off-the-shelf systems is mostly because they were very expensive and they were geared at cash crops. It just wasn't a workable solution. Sometimes there are softwares that are $1,000 a month, and we just can't afford that as a small organization. And a lot of those systems are also not user-friendly or cloud-based. And so here's just a little overview of what a form looks like. And so we can enter a new seed lot utilizing basically a link from our website, and we can share that with anyone we choose, and we can restrict access. And then on the right, we can sort of create the different ways you can enter into different tables in the database in a more appealing way than just a spreadsheet. So with that, I'm going to let Tula kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of some of this stuff.
Thanks, Catherine. So the way that we built the database was really user-oriented and real-life scenario-oriented. Like Catherine said, we're ecologists, seed collectors, and native seed partnership builders, not necessarily technologically adept people. Or yeah. So we wanted to make our system work not just for the seeds and the people, but also for the data that we actually need. And a big priority was also on like long-term data storage and tracking, something that was collected years and years ago through multiple generations of grow out and eventual application to restoration sites. So with that information in mind, we started with the scouting phase of seed collection. So that's where you go out, find a population, and you decide that you want to collect seed there. We use a mobile GIS app to do this. It's called Mergin. It's just a free version. Theme here, we like free, we like user-friendly. We're a nonprofit, so it's basically like Survey123 or something you would use with any other GIS platform that has a mobile app component. And that just allows us to map out where our plant populations are that we want to collect seed from and collect any relevant data that is important to us. So in our case, it's usually the location, phenology of the plant's really important. When are we going to come back? When should we think about coming back to collect seed? And then, things like ownership of the site. So this is a little technical, but basically when you have your data set in your GIS app, it creates a attribute table, which is basically a spreadsheet. And that is the orange box on the left here. And then, and this is all customizable. These are just the data points that we wanted to collect. Anybody could build a system that collects different data. And then when we import that data into Baserow, the database platform, it's all there, but I'm just highlighting that we create a population ID, and that's just a shorthand code way to find that scouting record again. So from the GIS data collection to the population ID is just everything that's underlined on the left box goes into that. And then the number at the end is just assigned by Baserow as a shorthand number code. But we're humans, we don't think in numbers, we think in places and dates and species. So this is just an example of what that looks like in the database. There's a table on the left, or a list on the left of all of our tables that are part of the database. And then these columns represent data fields that we collected. So the population ID I just talked about, and then all of the associated data. And we could scroll over to the right and see many more fields that we populated. Oops. So after the scouting phase is the seed collection phase. There's some Perdridia or Yampa that Catherine collected. There's our intern, Ayana, on the right with several bags of seed that we've collected together. This is the data that we record in the field typically, and that just allows us to reference back to the scouting record that we created. It's pretty simple. Many of you probably have similar systems to just keep track of seed that you've collected. And then that goes to our seed processing warehouse. And ideally, we're immediately linking that seed session to the scouting record. And that creates a new seed lot record. So when that record's created, and you might have seen the form that Catherine showed on her slide, the user or the seed collector or the seed cleaner is looking up the original scouting record and then adding in additional data about it. So usually that's what's on the bag. And then in addition, they might weigh the seed, put the quantity in there, and estimate the pure live seed percentage. This is what that looks like in the database. So again, on the left, we're now in the seed lot table. And here's the scouting link that we talked about. And then here are all the in yellow circles are the fields that were pulled in via lookup in the database. So instead of having to enter the species name again, which is often a sort of a big source of data error, is misspelling those Latin names, it's just pulled from the original scouting record, which we've already quality checked for spelling errors and standardized. Same with the collection site name. These are all standardized. And then the other fields are those that we fill in after the seed accession is made. So the next phase is the cleaning and storage of seed. So this may happen several weeks to months after the wild collection or the harvest is made. So we can use Baserow. In another table, we have all of the seed cleaning protocols that we use by species. That's really helpful when you have new staff coming in to do seed cleaning and they need to know what screen sizes to use and things like that. We re-access that seed lot record that we created after the collection happened, and we add in more data like how much we have after we cleaned it, what the pure live seed is again, and then we can actually use all that data to just directly make a label for the clean bag of seed. There's a little video. And then the QR code we can actually use to look up the data in our seed database. So last slide here, this is the seed draw that we can do using the database, and we can write or we can keep track of how much was taken within that seed lot record. We can also start a new table for any amplification work that we're doing and keep track of who's growing it, how much they received, and it's all traceable back to that original wild collection. So this is a complicated schematic that we made for our staff. I think I just wanted to show it to talk about the fact that it's really a flexible system. It looks convoluted and complex, but that's what allows for folks to use it in different ways. So, for example, if they skipped making the scouting record, they went straight to collecting seed, they can go back and just create a new scouting record based on what they know about the location. And that's our presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks everybody. And one quick thing is in the HOVA app on our talk, there's a link to a little bit more in-depth YouTube video we made about the database. And then just know that you can reach out and ask questions after this. And there's a link to our website on the QR code.
Thank you to you both. Everyone is so excited about this resource. Thank you for the work that you've done for it. We have a question in the chat from Megan. Was it complicated to link margin and base row data? Do they integrate pretty seamlessly?
Currently, we use sort of brute force or a manual method. So I don't have an automation that connects those automatically just because there is a data cleanup process that happens. So basically, we're exporting a CSV from Mergen, cleaning it up, and then we can paste those data directly into the database in that scouting records table. There are ways to automate that, even the cleanup part, but again, we're not quite tech savvy enough to quite be at that point. But that's something we can develop in the future and is totally possible. We just haven't quite gotten there yet. But yeah, roughly, it's all tabular data. The way you set up your field collection, should mirror what is in your database. So you don't have to move things around as much, but that's basically the extent to it. It's pretty simple.
Awesome. Happy to hear that. There's another question. Is it possible to use base row offline while in the field?
Base row itself, I think you need an internet connection because it's cloud-based, but we don't really have a need to. I suppose you could download an online or an offline version of like your seed accession records and have them on your device. But as far as making edits, I don't know that it has the capability to do it when you're out of service. Again, we do our data collection in Mergen, which does have an offline capability, and then those data get brought into the database when we're back in service. So it's a bit of a two-step process, but it's not really a field. It's really a seed tracking database that's meant to be used, on a computer, and then you can enter data easily from a device, but you have to have some kind of internet connection.
Awesome. What kind of data are you linking in terms of once the seed goes into production?
So this is an area we developed or we're in development for. And so we have, of course, a table that tracks all of our grower information, like where they're located. We can upload contracts. We can do all that kind of back-end contracting stuff. We can also, I have a table built that we haven't quite utilized yet that tracks their production specs. So their spacing, how many plugs they put in, how much their seeding rate was, how big their bed is. So really, the sky's the limit on what you want to track. And then also harvest quantity and, how much seed was produced year to year. And so there's, and then those growers are then linked back to the specific seed lots they were given. So if you're looking at the grower table, you can navigate back to the native seed lot and accession information, or if you're in the accession itself, you're going to see that it's linked to either a grower. And then you could also do that same process for restoration sites. Again, we're not quite at that point of developing that out fully, but you could take any information from that wild collected seed and extend it out through its life cycle into a restoration site, even after it's been amplified, and still be able to get back to that wild accession record.
Great, thank you. What is the cost of base row? And is Mergen free, or is there also a charge for that?
So base row, it depends on how many databases you have and how much data you're storing, but it's really just a cloud hosting fee. So I think it's $30 or $50 a month for the hosting of base row, but that can change on how big of a system you have. And the Mergent isn't free because you are paying for basically the hosting of the cloud-based data. And we use Mergent pretty extensively and have, dozens of different projects for different parts of our organization. So for just the seed collection, I don't think it would be very expensive because you'd really only have to have one map-based form and the associated data. But I think it's based on how much storage you need, and there's like a yearly subscription. But again, it's maybe $1,000 per year as opposed to $1,000 per month just for the seed database stuff that we were seeing on the commercial market. And it works like a lot better than Access or some of these other older systems that people have hobbled together.
Great, thank you for that answer. We have time for a couple more questions. Can you track farmed maternal lines from your wild collections, and how easy was that process?
Yeah, we definitely do that. So it's in that farmer table in the database, we keep track of the G1, G2, and we can trace all that back to, the original seed that they used to grow that.
Great. And does Base Row have an inbuilt feature that generates QR codes per seed record? Or are you guys manually generating those QR labels?
No, I did. So you can create a direct link to each record and then use a third-party service to create a QR code for that. So a little clunky.
One nice thing about Base Row is they always seem to be updating it. Like now it has capabilities with certain AI features, and it seems like they're coming out with a new feature every couple weeks. And so they're really responsive to the community too, which is kind of cool. So I do think there's room for those to be improved. And then also there's the opportunity to automate the barcode because you could automate that system. I'm just not great at doing those automations yet.
Mm-hmm. We did use the AI feature quite heavily for some of the coding to do the linking between tables. So you basically just type in what you want the code to do and it just makes you the code. It's pretty magical.
Yeah, or the syntax for the formula. Because it's again, we're not techie. We're techie as much as we need to be, and then we try to get out and do stuff outside.
Thank you. Mia is asking, is there a spatial component within Base Row? For example, could you compare the locations of the collections to production/restoration sites?
Yeah, there is basically a UTM, or if you guys use lat long as one of the fields in various parts. And so you could always choose to add that information in. It's not really map-based in the sense that you would navigate the data through a map. There are different ways to look at the data in terms of a calendar view or looking at, you can look at the data in various ways, but they so far have not created a mapping element. I do think that, we use Mergent for that to navigate to our seed collection sites via a map, and then the raw data gets put in the database. So no.
I think that's on the long-term plan for development is to be able to generate from the database a map of all of our seed accessions. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, and I think we could export it to, a GIS program, right? And pretty easily make those records that are already in the database easily into a map, but it doesn't automatically do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have just one more minute for maybe this last question. Is it easy for people outside of your organization to interact with and update data, i.e. growers?
Yeah, and you can set the permissions however you want. And so you can, give just your staff members access to manually editing the database in the sort of desktop version. But then if you want volunteers and people outside the organization to still be able to enter data but not change the structure of the database, you just create a form that generates a link that you can put on any website or email to people. And then they will, when they click that link, will open up the form that you've created and be able to enter data. And then you'll get an email notification if you set it up that way letting you know that somebody is added to the database so you can look at it before, it goes too much further. But it kind of controls the quality and then also using like drop downs and trying to reduce the number of just regular text fields where there can be errors and really trying to guide people through so you have as little data cleanup as possible. We also, like, for when people are selecting species, we have a drop down of like all the plants that exist in Oregon that they choose from, as opposed to trying to spell out the Latin names properly every time, because that's where the errors come in.
Gotcha. Thank you, you guys. That's an incredible resource, and appreciate your presentation on it. Sounds like there's a link to reference this guide as well.
One quick thing, if there's enough interest, we do have the ability to convert our database into a template for other organizations to use. I'm not sure what the effort and time it would take on our end to do that would be, but if people want to mess around with this and basically use our thing as a template, that would be an option. So reach out to us, and within our capacity, we would love to try to help you figure this out because it's been really helpful for us.
It sounds like there is some interest in that. Thank you so much, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
And we'll move on to Laura Shriver, our next presenter with the U.S. Geological Survey. And they will be presenting on integrating science and management to improve seed-based restoration. Thank you for sharing your slides, and you're all set to go.
Okay, great. So hi, my name is Laura Shriver. I work for the USGS in Flagstaff, Arizona, and today I'll be talking to you about a highly collaborative project, as you can see from this long list of wonderful co-authors. So the US has made a lot of progress to increase the native seed supply and conduct research, much of it under the guidance of the Interagency National Seed Strategy. But a 2023 report from the National Academies of Sciences found that the US native seed supply is still not sufficient to meet growing restoration demands. So the report made several recommendations to improve the seed supply, including increasing research efforts, nurturing collaboration, and expanding the network of regional native plant partnerships. And in response, a team of USGS and BLM convened to 1, synthesize lessons learned in developing and using native seed, and 2, identify research directions and needs for implementing the seed strategy and report recommendations. So we focused on the BLM eco-regional programs as a case study because of their role in developing and using native seed and coordinating research and restoration efforts. These programs are located in the Western US, in the Colorado Plateau, Great Basin, and Mojave Desert, but we hope that lessons from them can help inform programs in other parts of the country and the world. And so ultimately, this project aims to support and enhance existing native plant programs and help provide a path forward for new programs. So to gather information, we conducted interviews with the BLM eco-regional program coordinators and science advisors, and then we hosted a virtual workshop with over 40 land managers and researchers from federal agencies, botanical gardens, and universities. And we know this is just a subset of the many, many people who work with native seed, and future workshops could definitely benefit from the perspectives of seed producers, policymakers, tribal nations, and a broader group of researchers and managers. And then based on our workshop and interview notes, we identified research and tools that help managers make decisions. And in this presentation, I'm mostly going to highlight USGS-led work done by co-authors and collaborators, but our upcoming publication on this project covers a more broad range of work across agencies and organizations. So we categorized emerging ideas under 3 themes: seed selection, which refers to selecting species and within species sources; seed production, which relates to increasing seed through agricultural practices; and restoration, which refers to using seed to restore native plant communities and associated data collection and knowledge transfer. And then within each of these themes, we categorized ideas as lessons learned or future research directions. So getting into results, I'm going to start with the lessons learned. An overarching theme is that sustained manager-researcher partnerships are really key to conducting applied research, as they facilitate sharing of resources and expertise needed to address manager-driven questions. Communication sustained these partnerships and was supported by venues for science and management to meet, like this conference and regular ecoregional meetings. Then lastly, cohesion around a shared vision, like the right seed in the right place at the right time from the seed strategy, further strengthened and provided direction for collaboration. We also saw that tools and evidence-based guidance were important for decision support. So this was a key result from a literature review we worked on, where we compared seed selection guidance from federal land management agencies to the scientific literature on seed selection in the Western US. So research directly informs agency guidance and management, but new research developments occur at a much faster pace than official agency guidance can be updated. So things like decision support tools, partnerships where evidence-based guidance is used to inform adaptive management, and active knowledge sharing can help bridge this gap between theory and practice. So let's look at a few seed selection tools. The BLM ecoregional programs use priority species lists that identify species of interest for research, development, and restoration, and are created with a variety of approaches. So one approach uses the umbrella species concept, where plant species are selected based on their use that are important to an animal of conservation concern, like the greater sage-grouse in the Great Basin or the Mojave Desert tortoise. So this slide shows an example of a tool used by the Mojave Desert Plant Program developed by USGS researchers called the Mojave Seed Menu Tool that allows users to create seed mixes for restoration from the priority list with inputs like desert tortoise use that can also be layered with other priorities like pollinator support. Within species seed transfer guidance is also useful for selecting genetically appropriate seed sources. There are many approaches to seed transfer guidance, and we discussed their uses, merits, and drawbacks at length. So one example is seed transfer zones, like these climate-based zones you've probably seen or used before, delineate discrete geographic areas in which seeds can be transferred. And that can help managers prioritize seed development efforts based on anticipated restoration needs within zones. Then on the other hand, seed transfer can also use a focal point approach where individual available seed sources are matched to potential restoration sites. These tools are a bit more flexible and can be helpful in areas with limited seed sources or climate adaptation needs. So for instance, the USGS Climate Distance Mapper tool ranks existing or to be collected seed sources to a restoration site based on climatic similarity for current or future climate scenarios. And this slide shows how this tool can be combined with the Mojave Seed Menus tool to select both priority species and sources within species. Getting into seed production, I'll give just the tiniest bit of background because we've talked about this a lot at this conference, which is that agricultural practices are often used to produce enough seed for restoration. And this is a really socioeconomically complex process involving a lot of partners. So producing new seed sources was seen as one of the major successes of the BLM ecoregional programs. And this success was facilitated by nationally coordinated programs, including the Seeds of Success program, which facilitates seed collection, and the BLM IDIQ program production contract, which facilitated agricultural production of new seed sources by seed transfer zone. And these programs, along with many others, helped streamline native seed development by providing standardized evidence-based protocols and resources for seed collection, cleaning, production, and storage. And non-federal programs also played an important role in developing the new seed sources. So for instance, regional native seed partnerships, such as those on this slide, including the Understory Initiative who just presented, they helped expand the activities of the BLM ecoregional programs by developing new seed sources, production methods, and working with smaller growers at schools, universities, nonprofits, and tribal nations to increase the market of who is growing native seed. Then getting into restoration, we see a lot of potential value in integrating research into existing restoration projects. Land management activities are constantly occurring, and we have a lot to potentially learn by integrating data collection, seed source tracking, monitoring, or even embedded experiments into existing projects. And this integration hinges on these manager-researcher partnerships and can help facilitate rapid incorporation of new science into restoration practices, i.e. that bridging theory and practice. So one example of this type of project is the SEEDS project, which is an interagency project partnership that incorporates large-scale experiments into existing post-fire recovery actions in the Great Basin to answer questions about things like site preparation, herbicide use, and seeding techniques. Another way to address manager questions is with networked experiments that test treatments across environmental gradients. So, for example, the USGS-led RestoreNet network, which I coordinate, tests revegetation techniques, seed mixes, and restoration treatments across 23 sites throughout the Southwest in partnership with a variety of land managers. So replicating experiments across space and time allows researchers to tease apart the actual treatment effects from the noise of environmental variability. We also see that synthesis of past and ongoing land treatment efforts is another way to integrate research and restoration. So for instance, the USGS Land Treatment Digital Library and associated exploration tool has data from several decades of BLM management treatments and are publicly accessible. So users can go to the website and select an area and then develop customized reports on things like site conditions, treatment details, monitoring, and effectiveness. And so these tools, along with other tools like the USGS Conservation Efforts Database, provide valuable public data that can be synthesized to provide science and guidance to managers. So now I'll briefly get into our future directions. Our team identified many important questions in seed selection, production, and restoration, and potential methods to investigate them. But we also realized that research goals cannot easily be separated from coordination goals, because effective long-term collaboration between scientists and managers is facilitated by effective communication, resources, and institutional support. So this figure distills our research and coordination directions into interconnected action items. So briefly, action 1 involves improving communication and collaboration, which when integrated with current and future research, and actions 2 and 3 can be used to merge research and restoration efforts via data collection, use, and synthesis to support action 4, improving knowledge transfer and informing future actions. So zooming in a bit on action 2, action 2 is about researching seed selection practices. So one direction we discussed is testing seed selection strategies across space, time, and species. So this includes testing different seed transfer strategies, the goal of helping make tools that help managers decide which seed transfer concept to use when multiple are available. This also involves testing novel seed sourcing strategies to adapt to predicted climatic changes, such as assisted gene flow strategies that select seed sources based on projected site climate. So in addition to considering current and future climate, we think seed selection guidance could also benefit from considering environmental factors like soil properties and community interactions with pollinators and pests. And this may be especially important for strategies like assisted gene flow, because sources chosen based on a projected climatic conditions may fail if the soil properties or community members they depend on aren't present in their new environment, or if a novel pest they're not adapted to is present in that environment. So next, let's look at a few research directions for seed production from Action 3. As we've heard a lot about during this conference, producing seed from wild collected plants is often a lot more difficult than producing conventional agricultural crops, and many native species lack established production protocols. So developing protocols is a key research direction, especially for species that are considered difficult to grow, but are important for restoration, like annuals or species that tend to produce vegetatively. So from a coordination perspective, protocols could be developed by including a research and development component in production contracts, and through working with plant partnerships and regional growers to pilot and test production methods at a small scale before committing to large-scale production efforts. Then another direction is researching how seed production methods affect the genetics, traits, and performance of resulting seed products. So for instance, pooling multiple seed sources together from different populations has been proposed to increase genetic and trait diversity, but mixing populations increases genetic risks. So research exploring this method could help illuminate species and scenarios where the benefits of this practice will likely outweigh the risks. Then we also discussed how artificial selection, either intentional through selecting for desired traits and uniformity through traditional cultivar development, or accidental selection that often inevitably occurs during production can both result in genetic and trait shifts. So the seed strategy focuses on producing seed sources that have not undergone any intentional selection, also known as source-identified seed production, but selected and cultivar seed is often more readily available. So research could help determine best practices for using intentionally selected seed and potential consequences of this, and identify methods to limit accidental selection during production. And last, I want to highlight some directions for Action 4, merging restoration and research efforts. So as we discussed earlier, we see opportunities to incorporate data collection, seed source tracking, monitoring, and experiments into existing projects. And we discussed how this process could benefit from a nationally coordinated effort to collect and store standardized pre- and post-treatment data. So this database could help support synthesis efforts, especially for continually sustained synthesis to continually update best management practices and make sure we're using the best available science for land management. So in conclusion, the lessons learned from the BLM ecoregional programs illuminate the importance of sustained collaboration and translation of research into user-friendly decision support tools. And there's still many uncertainties and knowledge gaps in native seed research. We believe addressing them through partnerships that merge research and restoration efforts and use data to inform future actions could help improve seed-based restoration. And with that, I want to thank the many people who contributed to this project. Please keep a lookout for our manuscript summarizing this project, which is currently under review with the journal Ecological Restoration. And you are welcome to contact me at my email, which is on this slide. I can send you the paper once it's out and put you in touch with other co-authors. And with that, if I have time, I will take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura.
You probably can't see my screen anymore if I try to
Not
go
anymore,
back to
but that is a beautiful bird. Okay. Love the background. We do have a question.
Stop sharing.
Thank you so much. So how can I access the seed selection and distance tools offered by the USGS?
Yeah, I think the climate distance mapper tool, if you just type climate distance mapper into Google, I believe, it will show up. There's also another tool I didn't get a chance to highlight, but that does a similar thing with a broader range called the seed lot selection tool. I think that's the current name for it. So I will grab some links to those and put them in the chat.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. And you could also add it to Whova at any point as well. And there's also an additional link added in the chat for people's interest. As well as a comment, a central clearinghouse of seed selection tools would be a good resource. Additional questions from Rachel. How is the work you're doing at USGS being impacted by changing federal priorities?
I feel like I can't really talk about that in this public space at the moment, but message me and I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome, thank you.
We did lose all the funding for this project, but made it happen.
Incredibly. Oops. Is the Eastern US included in these tools, or are they primarily focused in the West?
I'm pretty sure the Climate Smart Restoration tool, which Sarah Barget just helpfully put in the chat, I'm pretty sure that one is the entire, all of North America, whereas the Climate Distance Mapper is the Southwest. And then the US Land Treatment Digital Library is mostly the West just because it houses BLM data, and that's where BLM offices are primarily located.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And it looks like we're off to the next talk. I appreciate your presentation. Thank you. And I will introduce Frischie Grills from Meewasin Valley Authority, presenting on nurturing seeds of change, recommendations to build a native seed industry in Western Canada. And Frischie, you are all set to begin.
Okay. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak. Last year, I attended the conference in Tucson. It was a great experience, and I really appreciate the opportunity today. So today I'm talking about a project that I worked on looking at building the native seed industry in Western Canada, working on a project through a program called Nuffield Canada through an agricultural scholarship. And this is a travel-based scholarship, and I was able to travel around the world to study native seed industry, take that information back to help grow our industry in Canada. And funding from this was provided from the Nature Conservancy of Canada, with also multiple other sources, including Saskatchewan Provincial Parks, Meewasin Valley Authority, where I work, Brett Young Seeds, and then also Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company, which is a family-based business that my wife and I own here in Saskatchewan. Nuffield scholarships are an international scholarship that looks at building agriculture throughout the world. And it's an international connection of agricultural producers at all different aspects, from seed producers to ranchers to agriculture policymakers. There's 1,700 scholars around the world. And our intention of this scholarship is to learn from others and take that information back and to help grow your industry at home. Just to put things in perspective, I'm from Saskatchewan, Canada, in Saskatoon, which is in the center of the northern end of the northern Great Plains of North America. In Western Canada, we have less than 20% of our native grasslands left. Majority of that is in southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan. In Saskatchewan as a province, we have less than 16% of our native grasslands remaining. Majority of them have been lost to the plow, but also urban expansion and then also fragmentation from roads, oil development, and other developments. And then the tallgrass prairie of southern Manitoba, there's less than 1% of 1% left. And that's the really northern extreme of that prairie, crossing the border, hitting south of Winnipeg. So with my project, I had the great opportunity to travel for 2 years, starting in 2024. I was able to go to Mato Grosso do Sul in Brazil for a couple of weeks. I went over to Europe, visited Ireland, Northern Ireland, Germany, Estonia, and attended numerous conferences in both Europe and then also in the United States and Canada. And what I was looking at was how can we work as native seed producers to grow this industry in Canada, to make it more robust, how to build these partnerships. But then also one of the things that I'm working on at Meewasin as part of my work is seed banking. And so how can seed banking also fit into this program as well? So as part of my travels, I got to go meet with native seed producers throughout those different areas that I went to go visit, and make these relationships with people. And it was interesting meeting with people in Germany and England and Ireland, different species than what we're growing here in North America. Quite often it's what their wildflowers are our noxious weeds here in Canada. However, that relationship and the same issues that they're facing are what we're facing here in North America. And it was really interesting to see how the different countries and the different models that they're working on to grow their industry. But also visiting with native seed producers, not just in Europe, but then also producers here in Western Canada to make those relationships, to make those contacts and develop those relationships, which is really important. Also, as part of my travels, I got to visit different styles of seed banking programs, whether it's the Q Millennium Seed Bank in England or the USDA Seed Bank in Fort Collins, or to even small programs such as the Borderlands Nursery and Nursery and Seed down in Patagonia last year was one of the tours for the conference, and their little tiny seed bank in a trailer within a garage. So looking at all these different models and trying to bring that back home to how we can build our potential seed bank here in Saskatchewan. Also visiting different restoration projects. What I really found interesting traveling through Europe is wilding and growing of native wildflowers and sort of naturalizing these park spaces is very common in Europe, a lot more so than we find here, especially in Western Canada. So it was really interesting to see some of these different projects, but then learning from those projects and try and bring them back home here. Also, meeting with different researchers that are using native plants for different projects, whether it's for biofuel or fiber or for latex industry, and looking at the potential of what native plants can be. And then also looking at those cultural aspects. Here in North America, of course, the indigenous use of native plants, especially in the Great Plains, there's a lot of stories and work with the indigenous communities on that. But then also seeing around the world what cultural aspects mean. It was interesting in Europe, a lot of the use of native plants was used for wildflowers, or native plants used for herbs, and just learning from those different industries or different uses was quite fascinating. And then, of course, those networks and conversations and conferences, running into people at a conference in Estonia and then running into them again in Tucson, Arizona, or meeting people with the INSR, like Stephanie today, meeting her in Vancouver, and then again at a couple other conferences. It's just that value of those relationships is very valuable in those networking. So as part of my project, so you go and meet with these people. You do, you look at your own industry at home, but you look at your industry comparisons around the world, and just sort of doing that deep dive. Looking back here in Western Canada, so our three prairie provinces, our native seed industry is very fragmented. We're under-supported. We don't have the networks like other countries have. We have a really low number of producers. We don't actually have a good stat on how many native seed producers there are in Western Canada. There was a survey done by the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan saying that there's 50 native seed producers in Western Canada, but a lot of them are small nonprofit groups that collect seed and then share it. But from an agricultural production perspective, we think there's probably less than 15 to 20 producers out there. We have no seed banking infrastructure here in Canada from a native plant perspective tied to restoration. There is for forestry, there's for agriculture, but we don't have that infrastructure for seed banking. Our seed demand is inconsistent and short-term procurement contracts. And quite often, there's not enough seed available on the market here in Western Canada, so we're reliant on imports. And so looking at seed that's coming in from the United States, quite often it's good quality seed, but we're not sure where that provenance is from. And sometimes we're bringing in seed from the southern part of the United States that maybe that seed is not adapted to our local climatic conditions here in the northern part of the Great Plains. So looking at what we need to help grow the industry here in Western Canada, first of all is looking at native seed production. Producers are a part of that. And I think quite often we forget that, to have a native seed industry and to have native seed production, you do need producers out there increasing that seed and making it available on the market. Also, the need for seed banking and seed storage is very important for that short-term, long-term, and then also that long-term for that genetic conservation as well. And then, but using that as part of the supply of seed for the industry. One of the things that we are lacking here in Canada is a lot of policies and governance related to native seed, also procurement policies as well, where local, provincial, and national governments can play a role in that. We also need to look at that market diversification innovation. Just thinking, instead of looking at seed or plants used for restoration or that urban gardening, are there different models that we can use for our seed? And then also building that collaboration and that coordination regionally, but also that national coordination as well. So looking at producers as the foundation of the native seed industry is looking at, is there ways that there could be shared infrastructure or funding to go into that infrastructure? Is there a way to look at using seed as foundation seed that goes to producers to help increase? And then also looking at sort of these long-term contracts to help, help producers forward contract over multiple years, knowing that there will be demand for that seed as part of that investment into that work. And that will result in more growers entering the market, larger scale of production, and then higher reliability. In terms of seed banks, looking at it not just from that genetic conservation perspective, which is we typically view a seed bank as that long-term storage of the genetic material, but also it's a way to store that species for that short or medium term, providing that seed for future increase, but also it's a way to, as part of working with Indigenous groups as well, there's a lot of interest here in Western Canada from Indigenous communities for conserving a lot of the native plant material in their communities. But they don't have access to that infrastructure for storage. And so there's a potential for that as well. Also, policy, looking at provincial and federal policies to help align with the growth of the industry, using developing things like a national native seed strategy to help create that policy. Also looking at seed zones, and the previous presentation talked about seed zones in the Western United States. Germany has a really robust seed zone program as well. We don't have anything like that here in Canada, except in the forestry industry in some provinces. Also, no standards and certification. In Canada, there's only 3 native grass species for Western Canada that are actually part of our seed labeling act through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The rest of the seed falls under common. And then also incentives for native seed. Also looking at diversification. So looking at more than just those large-scale restoration projects and also habitat, pollinator creation in maybe urban areas, but looking at other opportunities as well. Looking about native plant material for the food, looking at it for medicines, cultural gardens, and then diversifying those markets into the future. Also, working on those partnerships. And knowing that there was one of the previous presenters talked about those social networks of the seed industry and that restoration, and so building those networks and establishing things like the Native Seed Producers of Canada, which we've just created in the last year, but also getting to know who the industry is, have conferences, and start working together. So one of the things with the NUFL project is they want you to create this report, but then able to share it around the world. My report was published in January. I shared it on LinkedIn on a Sunday night once it was published, and I got an email from Nancy Shaw with INSR, and she said she was sharing it right away in her network. Within 2 days, I was getting emails from around the world, people as far away as Australia, China, South America, or South Africa, reaching out to me and reading about my report. And so that is part of what this project is. You look globally, but then you try and bring that back down to your own farm and being able to use the knowledge that you've earned to share that around the world. Here in Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Federation is in the process of developing a national native seed strategy. They've been working on this for the last 3 years, and their goal is to have this published in the next couple of months. So we are very excited to hear in Canada to see this document to be produced and be released in the near future. Also, we've created the National Native Seed Producers of Canada, which is a brand new organization made of native seed producers looking at sharing ideas, resources, technology, information, and also be a voice for the native seed industry. We have our first annual Canadian Native Seed Summit next Wednesday. It's online. If you go to our website, nativeseedcanada.ca, you can register. We're looking for people from around the world to join us. Our keynote speaker is someone from Germany talking about their programs in Germany. So we're looking at this, even though it's Canadian focused, we're going to make this a global celebration of native seed. Also, one of the things that we've developed as part of the Native Seed Producers is a volunteering labeling system for tracking seed provenance from wild collection through to seed production on the farm and tracking where the original source comes from, but also number of generations. And this is based on the work that was done in Germany. And we've just launched this in the last month. Also, there's a lot of strategies that are being developed across Canada and these regional strategies. And it's really exciting to see these projects underway over the last couple of years. And we're seeing this big groundswell of excitement on these collaborations and these strategies. We're also seeing collaborations forming. So Southern Ontario has 5 different collaborations forming. In the prairies here, we have one in Southern Alberta, Native Seed Collaborative, and they started about 5 years ago. In Manitoba and Saskatchewan, we said we needed one as well. Now we're actually talking merging the 2 collaboratives into one prairie collaborative so we could share resources, share ideas, and connect producers with policymakers and restoration practitioners. Also, for myself, where I work at Meewasin here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, we've been looking at doing a seed bank project and a local seed bank, but having that regional influence. And my travels through my NUFL project has really has really given us a lot of ideas on how to deliver this project. And we're in the process of fundraising to implement a seed bank. But then also tying this back to my family farm. We are small native seed producers. We have 40 acres of land. It's just my wife and I that work on this on our farm. But taking this global knowledge and applying it to our local farm is to help us grow our business as well. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Rennie. That's so exciting, especially about the summit. That's going to be a grand time. We do have time for a question if you're up for it. So did you find any skill sets, professional roles, or unique partnerships that help the regions you studied succeed in creating robust seed supply chains that you'd like to see in Canada adopt or expand in the future?
Yeah, no, very good question. I was when I was in Germany, I was extremely impressed with the work that was done in Germany. The organization, it's a big, long German name. The acronym is VWW, and it's a network of native seed producers working together to ensure local provenance of native seed in Germany. And so they've worked with the German government on legislation, on policy development. They have a strict seed zonation work, and then also a strict labeling program as well. So I believe they have, I think it's 21 different seed zones that the seed can only be used within the seed zone where it originally comes from. And so that's really spurred on the number of native seed producers in Germany, because if you have 21 seed zones, you need to have 20, at least you have to have a producer in each seed zone producing seed for that market. But then also that labeling and that tracking of provenance and the number of generations. One of the things that they're looking at is it's only 7 generations from wild type seed that's still classified as wild or native. Beyond that, they feel that there's been enough genetic drift and it's no longer could be classified as native or wild seed. And so then it becomes more of a variety. And so some of these policies and work that they've done is really huge. Also, looking at some of the legislation that's been passed in Europe, England has the biodiversity net gain work that they're doing, and then there's also the European restoration law that's been passed. And so there's some really interesting policies that have been implemented in these countries that have required the need for seed to be used for restoration. We don't have this in Canada, and so right now, it doesn't. Without that, it creates that demand, and so without the demand, we don't have the supply. Without the supply, we don't have the producers to create the supply. So yeah, it was really interesting to see those different aspects.
Thank you so much for that answer. It doesn't look like we have additional questions, but we do have a lot of excitement for you guys up there in the chat. So thank you so much, Rennie.
Well, thank you, Jenny. And yeah, I want to thank everyone in the United States for all their great support and sharing their ideas and stories and experiences. It's been a great asset, and we're hoping to take your knowledge and experience to help continue to grow our industry here. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here. And Latifa and Ben say hi. And that it looks like that is the end of our first Zoom 1 concurrent session.